Chapter 9, Sections 1 and 2 of J.B. Bury's The Students' Roman Empire, Part 1. The Students' Roman Empire, Part 1, by John Bagnell Bury. Chapter 9, The Winning and Losing of Germany, the Death of Augustus. Sections 1 and 2. Section 1. The Conquest of Germany. The subject of the present chapter is the story of the Roman Germany that might have been. Caesar's conquest of Gaul pointed beyond the limits of that country to further conquests. It pointed beyond the sea to the island of the north, and eastward beyond the Rhine to the forests of Central Europe. Caesar had shown the way to the conquest of Britain, he had likewise crossed the Rhine. As far as Britain was concerned, Augustus did not follow out the suggestion of his "father"; that enterprise was reserved for one of his successors. But in regard to Germany he was persuaded to act otherwise. The advance of the Roman frontier from the Rhine to the Albis (Elbe), and the subjugation of the intervening peoples, must have seemed from a military point of view good policy. The line of frontier to be defended would thus be lessened. The defense of the upper Danube, from Vindonissa on the Rhine to Lauriacum, would not be needed, and the Albis would take the place of the Rhine. This project of extending the empire to the Albis, into which perhaps the cautious Emperor was persuaded by the ardor of his favorite stepson Drusus, was well begun and seemingly certain of success, when it was cut short by an untoward accident, if there is not some deeper cause in the hidden counsels of the Roman government. But the winning and losing of Germany is a most interesting episode, giving us our earliest glimpse of the rivers and forests of Central Europe. Caesar in his Commentaries has given a brief sketch of the political and social life of the Germans in general, and of the Suevians in particular. This sketch, though somewhat vague and doubtless derived chiefly from the information of Gauls, is valuable as the earliest picture of the life of our forefathers, and one written by a great statesman. He describes them as a hardy, laborious, and temperate people, dividing their life between hunting and warlike exercises. They practice agriculture but little, and subsist chiefly on flesh, milk, and cheese. No one possesses a permanent lot of land; but the chiefs assign a certain portion of land every year, and for only 1 year's occupancy, to the several communities which form a civitas. At the end of each year the allotments are given up, and each community moves elsewhere. For this custom several reasons were given, of which the most important were, that the people might not by permanent settlement become agricultural and give up warfare; that the more powerful might not drive the weaker from their possessions; and that the mass of the people might be contented. The territory of each tribe is isolated from those of its neighbors by a surrounding strip of devastated, unpeopled land. This is a safeguard against sudden attack. In time of war special commanders were chosen; but in time of peace there is no central or supreme magistracy in the state, but the chiefs of the various districts, pagi, or tribal subdivisions, administer justice. The Suevi had 100 pagi, of which each furnished 1,000 men to the military host. The rest stayed at home and provided food for the warriors. The next year the warriors returned home and tilled the land, while those that stayed at home the previous year took their places. From this sketch it may be inferred that the tribes known by Caesar "were in a state of transition from the nomadic life to that of settled civilization." Some tribes must have been in a more advanced stage of development than others, and this development must have been proceeding during the age of Augustus; but we have no means of tracing it. The first disturbance in Gaul after the battle of Actium was the revolt of the Celtic Morini, in the neighbourhood of Gescoriacum (Boulogne), and their rebellion, perhaps, was in some way connected with the invasion of the German Suevians from beyond the Rhine, in the same year, 29 B.C. The Suevians were driven back, and the Morini subdued by Gaius Carrinas; while Nonius Gallus, about the same time, suppressed a rising of the Treveri, on the Mosella. The following years were marked by those measures of organization in Gaul which have been mentioned already, Chapter 6. There seems to have been a good deal of oppression in the taxation, and dissatisfaction among the provincials. In 25 B.C. German invaders came from beyond the Rhine, and were repulsed by M. Vinicius, but we know not whether they came by the invitation of Roman subjects. More alarming was the invasion which took place 9 years later. Sugambri, Usipetes, and Tencteri, tribes whose homes were on the right bank of the lower Rhine, crossed the river on an expedition of plunder, and inflicted a defeat on the legatus, M. Lollius, carrying off the eagle of the 5th legion. This event was not a very serious loss, but it was a serious disgrace. Augustus hastened to Gaul himself, taking Tiberius with him. The question of the defence of the northern frontiers was becoming serious. Tiberius was appointed to the military command in Gaul, and offensive operations were begun by the annexation of Noricum and the conquest of Raetia and Vindelicia. In 12 B.C., Drusus succeeded his brother as commander of the Rhine army. He was a brilliant young man, hardly 25 years old, handsome, brave, and popular; of winning manners worshipped by the soldiers, ardent and bold, but a sagacious leader. He lost no time in setting about the accomplishment of his scheme of conquest beyond the Rhine, and the occasion was given to him by the hostilities of the Sugambri and their confederates. Having inaugurated the altar of Augustus at Lugudunum, and thus called forth a display of royal sentiment in Gaul, he proceeded to the lower Rhine, threw a bridge across the river, and entered the land of the Usipetes, who had already begun hostilities. This tribe dwelled on the northern bank of the Luppia, a tributary of the Rhine, which still bears the same name in the form Lippe. The land south of the Luppia belonged to the Sugambri, and southward still as far as the Laugonna, now shortened to Lahn, dwelt the Tencteri. Having quelled the Usipetes, the Roman general marched southward to chastise the Sugambri, who, under their chieftain Mello, had begun the hostilities. But at present his way did not lie further in that direction. His plan was to subdue the northern regions of Germany first, and he had decided that this must be done in connection with the navigation of the northern coast. There were 3 stages from the Rhine to the Albis. The conqueror must first advance to the Amisia, and then to the Visurgis, before he reached the Albis, his final limit. The names of these rivers, thus Latinized by Roman lips, are still the same, the Ems, the Weser, and the Elbe. A canal connecting the Rhine with Lake Flevo, as the sheet of water corresponding to the Zuider See was then called, was constructed by the army under Drusus, from whom it was named the Fossa Drusiana, so that the Rhine fleet could sail straight through the lake into the German Ocean, and coast along to the mouth of the Amisia. The Batavians acknowledged without resistance the lordship of Rome, and helped the troops in cutting the canal; and the Frisians, who dwelled north-east of Lake Flevo, likewise submitted to Drusus without resistance. Having thus secured the coast from the Rhine to the Amisia, he occupied the island of Burchanis, which we may certainly identify with Brocum, at the mouth of that river, and, sailing up the stream, defeated the Bructeri in a naval encounter. Returning to the sea, he invaded the land of the Chauci, who inhabited the coast regions on either side of the mouth of the Visurgis. But it does not appear whether the Roman fleet sailed as far as the Visurgis, or whether Drusus advanced into the territory of the Chauci from the Amisia. On the return voyage the ships ran some danger in the treacherous shallows, but were extricated by the friendly Frisians, who had accompanied the expedition on foot. Thus the work of Drusus in the first year of his command was the reduction of the coast of Lower Germany as far as the Visurgis. In the next year, 11 B.C., he determined to follow this up by the reduction of the inland regions in the same direction. For this purpose he had to choose another way. The chief military station on the lower Rhine was at this time Castra Vetera, situated not far from the mouth of the Luppia. Starting from here in spring, the legions crossed the Rhine, subdued once more the unruly Usipetes, threw a bridge across the Luppia, and entered the land of the Sugambri. In order to advance eastward, it was necessary to secure the tranquillity of these troublesome tribes in the rear. Then following the course of the Luppia, Drusus advanced into the land of the Cherusci, the modern Westphalia, as far as the banks of the Visurgis. It was thought that the Sugambri might have thrown obstacles in the way of this achievement, but they were fully occupied by a war with their southern neighbours, the Chatti, who dwelled about the Taunus mountains. Want of supplies and the approach of winter prevented the Romans from crossing the Visurgis. In returning, they fell into a snare, which, but for the skill of the general and the discipline of the soldiers, would have proved fatal. At a place named Arbalo, which cannot be identified, they were surrounded in a narrow pass by an ambushed enemy. But the Germans, confident in their own position, and regarding the Romans as lost men, took no precautions in attacking; and the legions cut their way through, and reached the Luppia in safety. On the banks of that river, at the point where it receives the waters of the Aliso, Drusus erected a fort, as an advanced position in the country, which was yet to be thoroughly subdued. This fort, also named Aliso, perhaps corresponds to the modern Elsin, the river being the Alm. About the same time another fort was established on Mount Taunus, in the territory of the Chatti, whom the Romans drove out of their own land into that of the Sugambri. The following year, 10 B.C., seems to have been occupied with the subjugation of the Chatti, who were fighting to recover their old homes between the Laugonna and the Moenus (Main). During this year Drusus possessed the proconsular power, that is, the secondary imperium, as it is called, subordinate to that of the Emperor, which had been conferred upon him by designation in the previous year. Soon afterwards, perhaps in the following year, along with his brother Tiberius, he received the title of imperator. While Drusus was thus actively accomplishing his great design of a Roman Germany, he was not neglectful of the defence of the Rhine, which was secured by a line of 50 forts on the left bank, between the sea and Vindonissa. The chief station of the lower Rhine was Castra Vetera; of the upper, Moguntiacum (Mainz), probably founded by Drusus. Among the most important stations, which were established either at this time or not much later, were Argentoratum, the southern Noviomagus, which corresponds to Speyer, Borbetomagus, Bingium, Bona; the northern Noviomagus, which is still Nimeguen; and the northern Lugudunum on the Rhine, which was become Leyden, in contrast with its southern namesake on the Rhone, which has been transformed into the softer Lyon. In the following year the victorious young general, who might now lay claim to the title of "subduer of Germany," entered upon his first consulship. Bad omens at Rome in the beginning of the year did not hinder the consul from setting forth in spring, to carry on his work beyond the Rhine. This time he was bent on a further progress than he had yet achieved. Hitherto he had not advanced beyond the Visurgis; it seemed now high time to press forward to the Albis itself. Starting probably from Moguntiacum, he passed through the subject land of the Chatti and entered the borders of the Suevi. Then taking a northerly direction, he reached the Cherusci and the banks of the Visurgis, and crossing that river marched to the Albis, hitting it perhaps somewhere in the neighbourhood of the modern Magdeburg. Of his adventures on this march nothing is definitely recorded, except that the Romans wasted the land, and that there were some bloody conflicts. On the bank of the Albis he erected a trophy, marking the limit of Roman progress. A strange and striking story was told of something said to have befallen him there, and to have moved him to retreat. A woman of greater than human stature stood in his way and motioned him back. "Whither so fast, insatiable Drusus? It is not given to thee to see all these things. Back! for the end of thy works and thy life is at hand." And so it fell out. The days of Drusus were numbered. Somewhere between the Sala, a tributary of the Albis, and the Visurgis, he fell from his horse and broke his leg. The injury resulted in death after 30 days' suffering. There seems to have been no competent surgeon in the army. The alarming news of the accident was soon carried to Augustus, who was then somewhere in Gaul. Tiberius, who was at Ticinum, was sent for with all haste, and with all haste he journeyed to the recesses of the German forest, and reached the camp in time to be with his brother in the last moments. The grief at this misfortune was universal. Both the Emperor and the soldiers had lost their favourite, and the state an excellent general. Drusus was not yet 30 years old. He had accomplished a great deal, and he looked forward to accomplishing far more. Perhaps nothing will enable us so well to realize his importance in history, as the reflection that, if he had lived to fulfill his plan, his work could not have been easily undone, the events which are presently to be related could not have happened, and the history of Central Europe would have been changed. The corpse was carried to the winter quarters on the Rhine and thence to Rome, where it was burned. The ashes were bestowed in the mausoleum of Augustus. 2 funeral speeches were pronounced, one in the Forum by Tiberius, the other by Augustus himself in the Flaminian Circus. Besides these solemnities, more lasting honours were decreed to the dead hero. The name Germanicus was given to the conqueror of Germany, and to his children after him. A cenotaph was built at Moguntiacum, and a triumphal arch erected to record the founder of the new province. It would seem that Moguntiacum was in some special way associated with Drusus. These monuments in stone have not come down to us, but there has survived a monument in verse, an elegy addressed to his mother, the Empress Livia. We could wish that the author of the Consolatio ad Liviam had given a more distinct picture of the qualities of the young general whom he deplores. SECT. II. — Tiberius in Germany. The Pannonian Revolt. It now devolved upon Tiberius, who possessed the proconsular power and the title of imperator, to carry on his brother's work. He took the place of Drusus as governor of the three Gauls and commander of the armies on the Rhine, and maintained the Roman supremacy over the half-subdued German tribes between that river and the Albis. The pacification of the Sugambri was at length effected by strong measures, and they were assigned territory on the left bank of the Rhine. Each summer the Roman legions appeared in various parts of the new province, the Roman general dealt out justice, and Roman advocates appeared beyond the Rhine. There was still much to be done to place Germany on the level of other provinces. It would have been perhaps unsafe as yet to require the Germans to contribute auxilia, or to impose on them a regular tribute. Tiberius possessed the confidence of the army, but he did not, like Drusus, possess the affection of the Emperor. In 7 B.C., the year of his second consulship, he received triumphal honours, but he did not return to Germany, and in the following year he retired to Rhodes. Little is recorded of his successors, but it is not to be assumed that they were idle or incompetent. The courtly writers of the day had eyes only for the exploits of Drusus and Tiberius, the princes of the imperial house. The consolidation of the conquests of Drusus was doubtless carried on amid frequent local rebellions, such as that in 1 B.C., which was put down by M. Vinicius. Another legatus, L. Domitius of Henobarbus, built a road, called the Pontes Longi, connecting the Amisia with the Rhine. These commanders, however, were not entrusted, like Drusus and Tiberius, with the government of the three Gauls. After the deaths of Gaius and Lucius Caesar, Tiberius was reconciled with his stepfather, and undertook the command of the armies on the Rhine once more. The legions were delighted to be commanded by a general whom they knew and trusted, whose ability was proved, and who was now marked out as the successor to the Empire. And there was a need of a strong hand, for there had been many tokens of an unruly spirit. In the first campaign, 4 A.D., Tiberius advanced beyond the Visurgis, and reduced the Cherusci who had thrown off the Roman yoke. And for the first time the Roman army passed the winter beyond the Rhine, in the fort of Alisio on the Luppia. In the following year, 5 A.D., the lower Albis was reached, and an insurrection of the Chauci was suppressed. The Langobardi, who dwelled in these parts, and of whom we hear now for the first time, a people destined in a later age to rule in Italy, and to become famous under the name of Lombards, were also reduced. This expedition was carried out by the joint operations of a fleet and a land army. Tiberius repeated on a larger scale what Drusus had done 18 years before. But while on the earlier occasion the Roman fleet had not advanced beyond the mouth of the Visurgis, if so far, under the auspices of Tiberius it reached the Albis, and even sailed to the northern promontory of the Cimbric peninsula. Some peoples east of the Albis, such as the Semones, the Charides, and the Cimbri (in Denmark), sent envoys seeking the friendship of the Emperor and the Roman people. The authority of Tiberius had thus pacified the trans Rhenane dominion of Rome, and in the following year (6 A.D.) a new enterprise of conquest was entrusted to his conduct. When Drusus in his last expedition marched up the Moenus, he entered the land of the Marcomanni, and they, under the leadership of their chief Maroboduus, retreated before him into that lozenge shaped, mountain girt country in central Europe, which has derived its name Boiohamum (Bohemia) from the Celtic Boii, who then inhabited it. The Marcomanni dispossessed the Celts, and Maroboduus established a powerful and united state, which extended its sway eastward and northward over the neighbouring German tribes. The ideas of this remarkable man were far in advance of his countrymen. He had a leaning to Roman civilisation, and he was ready to learn from it the methods and uses of political organisation. He formed and disciplined in Roman fashion an army of 70,000 foot and 4,000 horse. But his policy was essentially one of peace. He desired to avoid a war with Rome, and yet to make it plain that he was quite strong enough to hold his own. He was willing to be a friendly ally, but he was not disposed to be a vassal. Geography, however, rendered a collision unavoidable. For Rome, possessing Germany in the north, and Noricum and Pannonia in the south, it would have been impossible to allow the permanent presence of an independent German state wedged in between these provinces. The actual occupation of the territory between the Dravus and the Danube, if it had not already taken place, was merely a question of time, and it was obviously necessary to have a continuous line of frontier from the Albis to the Danube. Policy demanded that the Empire should absorb the realm of Maroboduus, and advance to the river Marus, now the March, which flows into the Danube below Pressburg. The legions of the Rhine under an experienced commander, Sentius Saturninus, advanced from the valley of the Moenus, breaking their way through the unknown depths of the Hercynian forest to meet the legions of the Illyricum, which Tiberius led across the Danube at Carnuntum. Both armies together numbered 12 legions, nearly double of the troops mustered by Maroboduus. And under the command of a cautious and experienced leader like Tiberius, the success of the enterprise seemed assured. But it was not to be. Before the armies met, sudden tidings of a most alarming kind imperatively recalled the general. A revolt, caused by oppressive taxation, had broken out in Dalmatia and Pannonia, and of so serious a nature that not only were the Illyric legions obliged to return, but the troops of Moesia and even forces from beyond the sea, probably from Syria, were required to assist in suppressing it. This would have been an excellent opportunity for Maroboduus to take the offensive, but he clung to his policy of neutrality, and accepted terms of peace which were proposed by Tiberius. The army of Sentius Saturninus hastened back to the Rhine to prevent a simultaneous outbreak there. The Pannonian revolt lasted for 3 years, the Dalmatian for 1 year longer. In Dalmatia the leader of the insurgents was one Bato. He made an attempt to secure Salone, but was obliged to retire severely wounded, and had to content himself with ravaging the coast of Macedonia as far south as Apollonia. The legatus of Illyricum, M. Valerius Messallinus, son of the orator Messalla, contended against him with varying success. In Pannonia another Bato, chief of the Beruci, was the most prominent leader. As the Dalmatian Bato failed to take Salone, so the Pannonian Bato failed to take Sirmium, and was defeated before its walls by Aulus Caecina Severus, the legatus of Moesia, who had hurried to the scene of action. After this the two Batos seem to have joined forces and taken up a strong position on Mount Almus, close to Sirmium. Tiberius passed the winter in Siscia, and made that place the basis of his operations in Pannonia. As many as 15 legions were ultimately collected in the rebellious provinces under his command, and the royal princes of Thrace had also come to the rescue. An unusually large number of auxiliary troops, fully 90,000, were employed in this war. Terror was felt not only in Macedonia, but even in Italy and Rome. Augustus himself had hastened to Ariminum, to be near the seat of war. Levies were raised in Italy and placed under Germanicus, the son of Drusus, a youth of 21 years. In 7 A.D. the course of the hostilities was desultory. The rebels avoided engagements in the open field. Germanicus advanced from Siscia along the river Unna into western Dalmatia, and conquered the tribe of the Meze, who dwelled in the extreme west of modern Bosnia. Subsequently (7 8 A.D.) he captured 3 important strongholds, which seem to have been situated on the borders of Liburnia and Iepidia. The next serious event was the long siege of Arduba, in southeastern Dalmatia, which was marked by the heroic obstinacy of the women, who, when the place was captured, threw themselves and their children into the fire. But in the following autumn the Pannonian Bato was induced to betray his cause. He surrendered in a battle fought at the stream of Bathinus (August 3rd), and handed over his colleague and rival Pinnes to Tiberius, who in turn recognised him as prince of the Breuci. But his treachery did not go unpunished. He was caught and put to death by his Dalmatian namesake. Germanicus hastened in person to carry the news of the Bathinus to Augustus at Ariminum, and the Emperor returned to Rome, where he was received with thank offerings. But although this victory practically determined the end of the war, Tiberius was obliged in the following year to bring his forces again into the field against the Dalmatians, and Bato, besieged in his last refuge, Andetrium, near Salone, at length gave up the desperate cause, and was sent as a prisoner to Ravenna, where he died. When he was led before Tiberius, and was asked why he had rebelled, he replied, "It is your doing, in that ye send not dogs or shepherds to guard your sheep, but wolves to prey on them." Germanicus, who had taken part in the suppression of this dangerous and tedious war, the hardest, it was said, since the war with Hannibal, showed high promise of future distinction, and, like his father, was a universal favourite. Triumphal ornaments were granted to him, and he was placed first in the rank of praetorians in the senate. To Tiberius himself the senate decreed a triumph, but it was not destined to be celebrated. The people had hardly time to realize the successes of the legions of the Danube when the news came of a terrible disaster which had befallen the legions of the Rhine. Chapter 10.